I want to make a video on whether it is the Salafis or the Asharis and Muffawidah and Maturidis who are Ahlul Sunnah, right? So let's start. So here's a chapter I wrote that talks about that, and let's find it. All right, it starts here, 227. All right, so um, what I want to talk about. Let me just pause for a second. Okay, so I want to start with Saffarini because he was the main Hanbali scholar of his time, and he was there when Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab came, right? For those who don't know, he's the one who started the Salafi movement. So I want to start with just introducing some things about Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. This is from a history book written by the Saudi Salafis themselves, right? So it's not like I'm just quoting stuff that's against him. It's what they recorded. So we want to just start here, right? Uh, the book is called Durar al-Saniya. So we just want to start with some stuff they said, okay? All right, here we go. So So this is one of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab's criticism towards the all the Sunnis, right? So you have to understand that he opposed Sunnism of that time. What most of the Sunnis followed, he opposed it, and we're going to prove that. So let's start here. He says the fiqh for them is preoccupation with the book of so and so, meaning a certain scholar or this scholar or that scholar, right? And he wanted to warn against that. Likewise, other view, but their followers are they are the followers of the some of the later scholars, not the original imams, right? Meaning they don't follow the al Shafi or the imams that the madhab is based on, right? But this is a misunderstanding of what the madhabs are, right? He says these Hanbalis are among the least, meaning the Hanbalis are among the least of the innovated madhabs of the four, right? And then he mentions some of these fiqh books, the Iknan, Muntaha, and they're in the contradiction of Doctrine of Ahmed and its text, right? So in other words, he's saying that the Hanbalis out of the four are the least innovation, but they're still innovation because they follow fiqh books rather than Ahmed ibn Hanbal himself. Well, first of all, I do want to say that Ahmed ibn Hanbal did not have, Al-Tabari was strongly disliked by many of the Hanbalis of his time, right? And I wrote a chapter on that, right? And that's because he said about Ahmed ibn Hanbal that he wasn't really a fuqaha, he was a muhaddith, right? And if you actually look at his work, it's true that he didn't write a fiqh book, right? Like al-Shafi'i did. He didn't have a system of fiqh. His system of fiqh was really just to use the hadiths, right? So um, when you say that we don't follow the madhab of Ahmed, what exactly do you mean by that? How do you develop a madhab out of Ahmed himself, right? And I kind of also show this in my book as well, that really the Hanbali madhab, a lot of it is developed because Qadi Abu Yala wrote fiqh books, right? I forgot what the book is called, but I mention it in my book, right? If you look at the early Hanbalis, they don't really write fiqh books, right? Fiqh really means like, all right, this is our system of how we interpret the hadith, the Quran, to come up with a ruling, right? Before that, they really just relied on certain people's statements, right? Like Ahmed ibn Hanbal, or they would rely on the hadith, but it developed into something more of a real, a madhab, right? So once again, like I said, Tabari, who had his own madhab, he criticized it. Well, he didn't criticize; he just kind of said it more as like a historian. I think he wrote it in one of his books or something. So it's not like I'm here saying a controversial opinion. So, anyways, so for here he goes on to say, Muhammad ibn Habib said, the Hanbalis ever relied on what is in Ekna and Muttaha. They do not look at anything else. For them, whoever opposes the madhab of the later ones, right, the later Hanbalis, they have been in opposition to the madhab of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, right? And I believe someone told me this, so I can't prove it directly. But I believe he said the person told me that originally the Wahhabis were like, yeah, we got to go back to the madhab of Ahmed, and then the modern Salafis kind of gave up on that. They said, yeah, you can't really do it, so they now just use stuff like Ibn Qudama and his fiqh books, right? This is more. Makes their position more clear, right? These are other fiqh books, right? Similar books, he says. And he says, the Hanbalis of our time are the followers of these scholars, Al-Hijawi or Ibn Najjar, not the followers of Imam Ahmed, right? So in other words, he's very clearly opposing all the Hanbalis of his time, not just in Aqidah, but in fiqh, right? So that's important to note. And then he goes on to say, the later Shafis are in fact the followers of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, right? And these other scholars, the later Malikis, right? So he criticizes all the madhabs, says they're not following the original madhabs, but they're actually following the whoever developed it, right? The later generations, right? So we want to continue on that, and this is some of the. I'm just going to go over some of the criticism Muhammad ibn Wahhab had for other Hanbalis of his time. Calling them not Muslim, right? Kufar. This is one scholar who was a Hanbali, Suleiman bin Sahim, right? So in other words, before answering, remind you that you and your father are declared unbelievers, polytheism, hypocrisy, right? Yeah, the translation isn't perfect, but the point is, here's his point. We make this clear to you, perhaps, that you will repent to God and enter the religion of Islam, right? So in other words, as you can see, he's calling them polytheists, right? And he does this to a lot of Hanbalis from his time period. I gave a few other examples, right? They are the curses of monotheism, right? Very clear. I don't need to keep showing you everything. But he does this to almost everyone of his time period, right? That's not controversial at all. I show it very clearly in the second volume if you want to look at it yourself. It's throughout the book. But as you can see, he's doing takfir of these Hanbalis. There's another famous example, right? These are some of the scholars of a certain part of Arabia, I believe. They do not know the meaning of La ilaha illallah, right? They did not know the meaning of Islam before this time, meaning like before he came, right? It's almost like prophetic claims about himself. I do try to refute all his claims through hadiths and stuff in another part. This is in volume 2, which is more focused on Wahhabism. But, oops, one second. Yeah, there I am. But, I don't want to go too deep into it right now. But I want to actually look at, as Saffarini, there's a book called Nejd's Answers to Nejd's Questions, right? I actually translated it. I don't know if anyone else ever translated it. So, it's good. I think it's pretty helpful that you have it here. So, it's not the perfect. My translations are a little flawed at times, but I try to get the message across. Anyways, look. Let's see. Now, this is what somebody asked him. The person who studied the fiqh of the madhab of his time, that it is not allowed to act in accordance with the books of fiqh, right? People basically interestingly asking about Muhammad ibn Wahhab without saying his name, right? Essentially, he's saying about his principles. And he says, and it's clear he's talking about him, right? Like, I don't know, all these Salafis who try to, deny that. We've just proved that he said these things, right? It is obligatory to only act on hadith, tafsirs, leave everything apart from them, right? Or should we give significance to his words, right? And so this is his response. So, what should be the consequences for him to attribute to himself the station of mujtahid without right? And he goes on, and answers, it's a huge problem, big trouble caring about the unanimous opinion of the Islamic community, right? In a sense, Sunnah, right? Contradicting all the Imams, right? Not sees, right? I'm just going to explain it. Basically, the books of fiqh, to cease to act on them, right? He's criticizing that, right? And he goes into what fiqh is, right? These are the principles of fiqh, right? And he says, what are the books of fiqh if not the cream of the meanings, right? In other words, the understanding of them, right? what is obtained from the analogy, right? The sources of everything, right? I don't want to go over every word. You could read it yourself. But the point is that he's saying, look, that's just not how we do it. And he's saying this is a mujtahid destroying Sharia and following the wrong path to Muslims of Islam, and almost attributing prophethood to himself, right? Musaylima. And so he compares him to the false prophets in a way. And you do not need to attach importance to his words. And he's deluded, misleading others, right? And it is bankruptcy, right? Saying that we shouldn't follow these things. And, he does go into what makes somebody a mujtahid, right? And this is written by Ibn Hamdan. I've translated it. And in the end, his conclusion, it is to disregard the words of this liar, to turn away from him and his words, to follow one of the four imams, right? And every imam and jurist should warn against the like of this misguided person, right? And this is all the Salafis, all the Wahhabis talk like this, right? They're gonna deny it, but we don't want it. I'm not no longer interested in what the average Salafi or Wahhabi claims about their movement. I've studied the history of it. I don't need your opinion anymore. Now I know who you are. I don't need to hear what your defenses are now, right? They can sit here and defend it all they want. We see it. We see what it is. This is the heart of the movement. This is the foundation. In the end, he says, what does this ignoramus know about Quran and Sunnah? This is ironic because that's exactly what they always say, right? Isn't it? Quran and Sunnah, Quran and Sunnah. Well, interestingly, even 300 years ago, someone kind of mocked this point, right? Which is, what does this ignoramus know, right? And so you get the point. It's essentially, we're going to skip over everything. We're going to go right to the Quran and Sunnah. We don't follow the imams or we don't follow anything. That was the Wahhabi movement, right? And he says, written down the madhabs in the best way and explain them in the best way, right? And like I said, the Salafis gave up on trying to explain it they use the books. They use Ibn Taymiyyah, right? They use Ibn Qudamah. They use these scholars because they know they can't go on without them. So they'll still try to claim, oh yeah, we only follow Quran and Sunnah. But you have to understand what that meant was we don't follow any of the early imams, right? Anybody. But we see that they do actually follow them, right? So they're not even consistent with their own movement, right? And let me see. I want to make this video not too long. This is a hadith they often use, and I talk about it here in this chapter. They always mention the Salafis. Look, my community was split into 72, blah, blah, right? And then they'll go on to say, and then I want to mention this from Saffarini, the same guy, right? He says this in one of his book, Ahlul Sunnah, and he's a Hanbali, Muffawidah. He says Ahlul Sunnah have three sects, right? Athariya, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, right? Asharis, and Maturidis. But he does say that's all Ahlul Sunnah, right? So at this point in time, Ahlul Sunnah was united, the three, right? That's important. And so now we want to look. I just want to throw in this hadith. Najd is a place of earthquakes, right? Ibn Wahhab came from Najd, undeniable, and I proved that in another part of my book. But really, what I want to go into is, this is another hadith Salafis always use. There will never cease to be a group from my ummah manifest upon the truth, right? So what I did in my book, and I basically, this is one of the most important points in my whole book, actually. All of it is almost centering towards this hadith in a way, right? The idea is, look, and we can look at this. I go over this, all the Hanbalis and all that stuff, right? You find that there is many points in time where they don't agree with Salafi creed, right? So the idea that there will always be the Salafi creed will always exist, or the Wahhabi creed and all that stuff, right? The idea is that Ahlul Sunnah will always exist. So if Ahlul Sunnah will always exist, then there shouldn't be a time where suddenly the Hanbalis are all Muffawidah, right? Because otherwise, then Ahlul Sunnah does not exist in that time period, right? And that's kind of what I try to prove, is that the majority of Sunnis don't agree with them, right? And the whole Muhammad ibn Wahhab's three Tawheed, for example, I show in volume 2 that a lot of the Hanbalis did not agree with that, right? So the idea is that Ahlul Sunnah, if it's always supposed to exist, then surely the main points of the Wahhabi movement should have always existed, which they didn't, right? And it says also, notice the 72 splits, right? So I go into a little bit, and let me find it again. So I go into it here. There will be 72, and notice the word in the hadith. 72 is splits in the community. The word split in Arabic is furuk, right? Could essentially just mean splits or divisions, right? Another word in the statement is Jammah. All right. Yeah. The Ahlul Sunnah wal Jammah, right? Remember, ends with the word Jammah, which means community, right? Or assembly or gathering, right? So really, when you look at this hadith linguistically, it means uh, there's 72 splits, and the non-split is the community, right? Which is Jammah, right? The community. And I think it makes sense to say that, for example, when the Saffarini says that the Ahlul Sunnah Jammah is the Asharis, Maturidis, and the Muffawidah, that's more of a Jammah, that's more of a community, rather than the group that is trying to exclude everyone and split from everyone, right? The Wahhabi movement, right, which takfired everyone, right? We could study it. You could look at the second volume. Basically, everyone was kafir, right? So essentially, yeah. So you have to really think about it. Which one is the Jama'ah and which one is the split, right? And I do mention that again, right? I said Najd is the place of earthquakes and whatnot. And remember, he's takfiring everyone, calling everyone polytheist from his time period, right? He split from everyone. Uh, but these people are united, right? As Saffarini, who's opposing Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, right? And he's saying, look, these are the Ahlul Sunnah, right? So I think you have to look at it historically as which group always existed, right? Did the Salafis always, did these Wahhabis always exist? No, they came in, the year 1700? Before that, they didn't exist. Suddenly, this group comes in and calls everyone, oh, you didn't know what Islam was, La ilaha illallah, before we came. And they were killing everyone, right? And I show that very clearly here in this part. I forgot which part, but you'll find it. Yeah, yeah, that's it, though. That's it. I could go more into it, but I don't want to make it too long.